Hi, I'm Rebecca Donnelly, Potsdam Public Library Children's Librarian. Today, I'm very excited to have Laurie Wallmark speaking with me. She's the author of many wonderful picture book biographies for children focusing on women in STEM. Hi, Laurie. How are you today?
Hi there, I'm just fine. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I have to say this is, in many ways, absolutely my jam. It's picture book biographies, which I love. It's women in STEM, which I love.
Me too.
Well, that's great. So you have a background in computer science. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that led you to writing for children?
Sure. When I was in 10th grade in the summer, I took a course on programming Fortran, which was the scientific programming language. So that got me interested in it. In college, I took a few more programming courses, but I didn't major in computer science because there wasn't a computer science major back then.
Right.
I majored in biochemistry. And when I graduated, it was like science, computers, which way do I go? It was a very difficult decision. And then I found out there was a field called scientific computing that combined the two of them. So that was great. I entered the field. I ended up getting a master's degree in information. I'm going to do this one wrong. One is library and one is computers, information systems.
Or information science versus information systems.
Right.
I always like to joke that I'm a scientist because I have a library.
You are.
I'm a master of
Absolutely.
library information science. Yeah, anyway.
Right. So I programmed for about 10 or 15 years. And then I moved on to other careers, and I eventually circled around again and became a computer science professor.
Okay. Wow. And so you did that, and then how did you start writing for children?
Unlike most of my kidlit writing peers, I was not a writer as a kid. I wrote some songs, I wrote some poems. That was about it. And maybe about 20 years ago, I had an idea for a middle grade novel, and I love middle grade novels. I still do. I read them a lot. And I thought, I'll give it a try. So I took some courses. I read a lot of books about how to write. And no one wanted to buy that book. So, I realized, okay, I'm not a writer. So I stopped. And then 5 years later, excuse me, I had an idea for another middle grade novel. So I took some more courses, I read some more books, and this time someone did want to publish it, but they went out of business.
Oh no.
But now I was hooked. Now I was writing. And from then on, I just kept writing.
And so can you show us do you have your first book, your first book biography with you?
Okay, so my first book was Ada Byron Lovelace and the Thinking Machine. And what's interesting about the journey of this book is I lied when I said I kept writing from then on. I gave up again. I thought I came so close to getting published, I gave up. I'm not a writer, I'm a scientist. But I was taking a course on children's books at my college. And the professor said, when she found out I'd written a biography, she said, why don't you bring it in, read it to us? So I brought it in and I read it to the class. And you have to realize the class loved me. It was a bunch of 20-something people who were going to be elementary ed teachers and me. But I had never read my work to anyone just for fun. I'd only ever read it, to get feedback on it.
Right.
So this got me inspired again. I applied to graduate school to get an MFA in writing for children and young adults at Vermont College of Fine Arts. And I thought, you know what? Forget about getting published. I'm going to practice my craft. I'm going to learn how to be the best possible writer I can ever be. And this book was published my last semester.
Isn't that amazing? Just sometimes it takes that focusing on what you need to focus on.
Exactly.
I think, we all look at it as if publication is the goal, but there's a lot that it takes to get there.
Right. You need to learn a lot and practice a lot to be a good writer. And because I hadn't written a lot of creative writing as a child, I didn't have that long background of writing story after story after story that a lot of my peers did. So I needed that time to learn how to do what I do.
Well, and you have developed such a perfect niche for yourself, because there you are writing books for children about women in computer science. And I have to say, some of your subjects are familiar to me. So you have the book on Ada Lovelace, who is Lord Byron's daughter, right?
Right, and the world's first computer programmer.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think that's a story that I've heard in different settings and articles and things like that. And it's such an interesting tie-in to sort of the world of literature and things that we know about. Byron was so famous, and now Ada is becoming really famous.
Right.
Well, I see her name popping up everywhere, which is so gratifying. And you also have a picture book biography of Hedy Lamarr.
Right, let me show that one.
And I'll just say, I learned about Hedy Lamarr's double life from a children's biography, but it was a much more standard educational type book. And it did not get into nearly the detail that you get into. I would love it if you would talk about it a little and maybe show some of the images from the inside as well.
Oh, sure. One of the things I really like about the Hedy Lamarr book is it shows people that you don't just have to choose one thing. Sort of like me. I'm a scientist, a computer scientist. I'm also an author. Hedy was this glamorous, famous actress, and she was also brilliant. Mm-hmm. You don't have to choose. You don't have to be a nerd or whatever in order to do science. You can do other things. You could be a football player. You can be in the theater. It doesn't matter. So that's what I really liked about Hedy's story. And as far as pictures from it,
and who's the illustrator?
Start with the end pages, because
is that Katie Wu?
Yes, Katie Wu did the illustrations. And the reason I wanted to start with the end pages is because it's a poem. So back from when I was writing poetry as a kid, I still get to write poetry. So here we have her as her, whoops, let me just take off the cover. Obviously, that's not working. Here we have her as the famous famous movie star. The cameras are going off. She's walking the red carpet. But here's how she'd like to be.
I love that. The scene of the different things that she's invented. There's
right.
such a variety there.
And some of the things that she invented, which she didn't patent, are things that we have today. A light up dog collar, no big deal, but no one had thought of it back in her day. Mm-hmm. Stoplights that would tell you when they're about to change. That's our yellow light. That tells us a stoplight is about to change.
And so her big invention, and the reason that she gets this biography, is the signal, the frequency hopping that helped with tornadoes. Oh my goodness.
There was a tornado watch in New York City last night. So
a little distracted. Torpedoes in the Second World War, right?
Right. She had this great idea. She teamed up with another person. He was a musician. Mm-hmm. But he also knew more about armaments and things like that. So between the two of them, she came up with this idea that when you send a message, normally you send a message and you use one constant frequency. This is the frequency wave.
Right.
And she thought of the idea of switching it up. If you keep switching it, then the enemy can't figure out, by the time they figure out the frequency, you've changed to another one. And we still use that today with our Wi-Fi, with our Bluetooth, with all of our communications. And now we have outside, there's lawn mowing going on. So, we all live in the real world here today.
That is true. And can you tell us a little bit about, you have a book that did it just come out recently?
Yes.
Your most recent book?
Now, this one's called Numbers in Motion. When I was a child, I wanted to be a mathematician when I grew up. I was sure I was going to be a mathematician. I loved math. I read books about math. I did math puzzles, anything having to do with math. That didn't turn out that way, even though computer science is very related to math.
Mm-hmm.
But I always wanted to write about a mathematician. Both Ada Lovelace and Grace Hopper were mathematicians, but that's not what we know them for. I wanted to write about a mathematician where that was what she was famous for, to show kids, again, this is a viable career path. You too can be a mathematician. And in her case, she had challenges that we certainly didn't have. She grew up in Russia. She wanted to go to college in Germany, but she couldn't go unless she went with either her father or a husband.
Mm-hmm.
So she ended up in a sham marriage, a fake marriage, with a friend who agreed to be her husband so that he also wanted to study in Germany. They usually didn't even live together, but it enabled her to get out of the country. You know, she couldn't take classes with the other students. I mean, there's so many things that she couldn't do that we just take for granted now.
Mm-hmm.
But she persevered.
And what was her name? I don't think we caught that.
Oh, Sophie Kovalevsky.
Oh, okay. Now,
And in the back matter, I have some back matter about her name because I found it fascinating how we transliterate from languages that don't use our Roman alphabet, you know, our ABCs, right? Her name was in Russian because that's where she was born. It's the Cyrillic alphabet. So sometimes it's known as Sophie, Sophia, S-O-F-I-E, S-O-F, you know, many different variations. And then Kovalevsky, usually after a woman was married, she would be Kovalevskaya.
Oh, right.
Because
feminized
she's married. You know, so which name did I use in the book? The name she ended up using herself. I figured, good enough for Sophie, good enough for me.
Absolutely, and that's an interesting example of the kind of choice that you have to make.
Right.
Because sometimes a subject will have been referred to by other people in one way in their life, but they preferred something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many choices you have to make when you're writing a picture book biography because so many sources do differ, and they may even all be sort of correct.
Right.
And you have to figure out which one is actually correct and use that as your source.
Besides that example, can you tell me an example of something that you've learned in researching any of your books that just, you know, really impressed you?
I've had to learn so much more science. I thought I knew a lot of science. I thought I knew a lot of computer science. But show you another book. Okay, so, and this is actually, now that I put this one up, this isn't the one I meant. It's Back to Hetty.
That was Grace Hopper, Queen of Computer Code?
Right, okay, Back to Hetty Lamar. In order to explain in the back matter in more detail how her invention worked, I had to understand it. I had to read the patent. And one of the main books that people use as a reference for her life didn't have it quite right. You know, so that sort of led me off a little bit on the wrong path for a while, you know, until I actually read the patent myself, which was hard going.
Yeah.
Figured it out so that I could then explain it in the back matter.
Well, and that is a beautiful example of the depth to which children's writers will go to research for subjects. You know, I always advocate for children's nonfiction. It is not some sort of lesser format, right? You are out there, that's some pretty serious original source research going to read a patent.
What sounds like a minor example in my book that's coming out next year. It's called Codebreaker Spy Hunter, How Elizabeth Friedman Changed the Course of 2 World Wars. So the last spread shows her with her husband and her grandchildren, or yes, her grandchildren. How many grandchildren did she have? what sex were the grandchildren. I didn't need to know to write the story,
Mm-hmm.
but the illustrator needed to know to illustrate the story.
Illustrated. That's
So I called down to the archives that contain all her papers, and they looked up for me. Of course, I can't remember now what the answer was, but
right. But it's in the book.
you know, we wanted it to be correct. We didn't want, I knew there were 6 grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
boys, girls, you know, what age was the girls, the oldest, the boys,
Yeah.
you know, even little things like that you need to figure out.
Oh, absolutely, because it's such a visual format. It makes such a difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think you're saying that your sort of big message is to show kids that all types of careers are possible, and especially for girls in STEM. Do you do school visits, remote school visits? Because it seems like
Oh,
the thing that
absolutely. Even before now, I would do
right.
some remote school visits,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly now I do remote school visits. I've had to change up my presentations,
right.
obviously. You know, it's a little hard for me to be lining kids up and have them holding up cards when I'm here and, you know, they're there.
Yes, of course, and they're all at home themselves.
Right, things like that. But school visits is one of the best perks of being a children's author.
Oh, I agree. How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about your books or potentially look you up for a school visit?
I have a website, lauriewallmark.com, LaurieWallmark.com. And it has information about all my books, obviously. It has things for teachers. If you click on the teacher tab, there are curriculum guides for all of my books. There are activity guides that apply to some of my books.
Mm-hmm.
If you click on the visits tab, you know, it has information about my school visits. But most importantly, there's a contact me tab. You have any questions, contact me. You know, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, obviously.
Who is? Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for chatting with me today. This has been really fascinating. And I hope that,
this was a pleasure.
Learned a little.
Live chatting is so much better than videos. First of all, when you make mistakes, you just sort of continue on. You know, when I couldn't remember information systems versus information science, you know, oh well, you know, you just continue on. But live chatting with people, again, another perk of being an author, you know, getting to talk about your work, why you write it, you know. So why do I write about women in STEM? Here's the short answer. I love science and math. I really do. I have since I was a little kid. Oops, my fingers are below the screen. I'm counting on bizarre fingers, but that's okay. I love science and math. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that anyone can have any career. So my books aren't just for little girls, they're also for little boys, so that they understand that girls can be scientists too.
Mm-hmm. And that's a wonderful message. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Right, thank you, and bye.